The mind is very clever. The mind is here to protect us. It's not about ostracizing it and kind of casting it out and vilifying it. It is subconscious for a reason. It's subconscious because it's so painful for it to realize it and understand it. The dark has been vilified and is misunderstood. So when you say dark feminine or dark goddess, people are like, oh my God, like this is really dark and malevolent, basically. She is misunderstood because she's here to bring transformation. It really is the energy of destruction before liberation, and the ultimate goal is liberation. People don't like the discomfort that comes with that energy because it is uncomfortable. It means that you're going to have to change. You're going to have to look at things in a different way. And nobody wants to change unless they have to change. I mean, it's true for all of us, really. The dark feminine brings that energy of transformation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Illuminating Dialogues number 16, where I have the pleasure of talking to Catherine Björksten today. How are you, Catherine?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. It's really a pleasure to have you on. And just to give you a short introduction for the viewers who don't already know you, Catherine is a soul midwife, helping people move more consciously through the big changes in their life, offering a practical approach to spirituality with her natural catalytic energy. Along with her private practice, Catherine holds workshops and retreats to hold the bridge between the worlds, and we'll get into that. Mentored by Indigenous elders and leaders from various traditions, she's learned the wisdom of animistic consciousness and shamanic practices. Catherine is also the author of the book You Are Loved, Essential Spirit Guides and Guardians. It's such a pleasure to have you on, Catherine, and this podcast is called Illuminating Dialogues. So it's a dialogue to have a flow of meaning, to not just enlighten the speakers, but also the listeners as well, and perhaps venture into a dialogue that we haven't gone before. So I'm excited to go into shadow work, what is transformation, the masculine and feminine energies, and our connection really to nature and the elements. But before we delve into all of that kind of juicy information, I just want to ask you, what lights you up?
That, I think, is a great question to start with. Especially when you've dwelled a lot in the shadow and the underworld like I have. It's really been an exercise for me lately to focus on that, on what lights me up and brings joy and all of this. So loved ones, spending time with loved ones, whether it's, my children, my family, my friends, people who are on, a similar journey as well, shared journey that really lights me up and it sort of brings joy. And the other aspect is nature, being connected to nature and everything that we will talk about, the elements and the spirits of nature. And with that comes the element of ceremony, bringing the sacred into the mundane. It's something that I find really brings me a lot of light, and music and dance and really sort of being alive. I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but being grateful for life lights me up.
Yeah, often we can forget that on the day-to-day, like the life. And I'm just so interested, and I think the viewers as well, because I personally come from the Sikh background, Sikh tradition, and just to explore the ancient wisdom of the different cultures and to delve into maybe as well your story of what you can share from these ancient cultures and elements. So yeah, before we delve into, maybe as a coach, I'm also interested in, in the shadow and how we can actually achieve that transformation. Could you share a bit about your journey? How did you start to get in touch with the themes of transformation and how your own culture played into this as well?
Well, I think the transformation came from being severed from my own culture in a way, even though, so I'm Finnish originally, Swedish speaking, which is a minority within already a small population. And I grew up in France. I was only 6 months old when my parents moved. So the severance from the land and from the village and the more extended family brought already its own transformation for me, because I would have to learn, skills and ways of coping on a very primal level, because the tribe and the connection to the land is something that we have naturally. We don't think about it so much because we live in a culture where there's so much displacement and it's kind of like a normal thing. And I live in London, so most people here are displaced, like the vast
Mm,
majority are. But I think that in and of itself was kind of one of my initiations of, how do you then bring back your culture, your awareness. And then I have a whole thing around culture, which I think is also a huge conditioning that we have. And whatever we choose in terms of conditions that we are born into, the gender we're born into, the culture we're born into, the family we're born into, et cetera, is going to play out in terms of our evolution anyway. So, you know, I believe that actually Earth is a school for the soul.
mm,
So inherently, we're going to go through transformation, and we're going to go through these cycles of death and rebirth so that our consciousness grows along the way.
mm,
So in my case, I think the first one, as I said, was like the displacement. I was also a sensitive child, still am a sensitive person. And it's just about how do you learn to live with that? And then, every single generation also is here to heal from whatever the previous generation was exposed to.
mm,
So I think, I'm in my mid 40s, and my generation would definitely be healing from a lack of emotional awareness
mm,
from, our parents who were themselves brought up by people who were, most of them were going through some form of war. So survival was number one on the list, and
mm,
everything else was irrelevant. So, in a way, we're all kind of going through this journey of transformation, whether we're aware of it or not. And it really is a question of bringing an awareness to it. And to go into the other things that I've been through, I think, life situations that have been quite tough, different, difficult choices. Um, I think also everyone, through their teens go through an identity crisis of who am I, compared to who I've been told that I am. And there's kind of like this friction inside of us. Um, I mean, I partied a lot, and I think it's kind of like normal in a way in our culture. But then that went on a pretty self-destructive kind of, you know, tangent, had an eating disorder, like a lot of women my age would have had growing up in the 90s, well, being like in their 20s in the 90s
mm,
or late teens, where heroin chic was, like the aesthetic to follow, which was completely, unrealistic for anyone to sort of embody. It was the supermodel culture as well.
mm,
So beauty standards that were completely insane. So, all these things just brought me to a first stage of self-inquiry in my early 20s, because my body started, not being super happy about everything that I'd put it through. Um, and I think we all reach a point where we need to start asking ourselves questions. And then we have the choice to either start our self-awareness journey or wait for a bigger blow later on in life, which most people would have something, in their 30s or, midlife crisis kind of thing, where a loss of some form would really hit them in the face, because
mm,
the whispers of, okay, you need to change how you're living and how you're relating to yourself and to life would not be heard in time. So it's kind of like this snowball effect. And then I would say one of my biggest kind of, awakening moments was when I got a divorce, because that means that the family kind of ideal that we all grow up with, and there is a reason why we have that ideal as well. I believe very much now, 10 years down the line, that children need to grow up in an environment where they're kind of held by both parents and a bigger family. And we live in a society that kind of is, really going quite away from that, with a lot of parents who are divorced and families that are displaced, and kids grow up in another country than where the bigger family is. But that for me was a massive catalytic kind of event, because before that I had a calling and I knew it. I knew it in my soul, and the synchronicities around shamanism, or shamanism, depends on how one wants to pronounce it.
Mm.
And it just started coming to me. The people that I met, the things just aligned, and I found myself going on a vision quest, and that was really kind of like, you know,
Mm.
the big kind of launch, rocket launch, which was in 2014. So that was that was 10 years ago.
Wow.
And since then, I was really privileged to go through various rites of passage, meet different elders from various lineages and traditions that then introduced me to the whole animistic consciousness cosmology, which just made so much sense to me.
Mm. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I really resonated with a lot of that. I think what you said about school of learning as well, like whether we know it or not, that transformation is here and we're doing that at a deeper level. And we have a phrase, I think its origin is in Sanskrit, it's called Dharamsal. It's like a place of learning.
Mm.
And I think what you resonated with me, it's like whether we are seeking for it or not, or we have that blow, you know, we might not come across transformation until it hits us. So people listening to this, they might be self-inquiring, they might be interested in this, or sometimes I find people are asking, why should I change? Why should I transform? Um, you know, so I just want to ask, maybe before we go into um, more of the interesting details behind the shamanism, what is transformation and what is the shadow work?
Um, Transformation is obviously something needs to change.
Mm,
And then we can choose whether we go there or not.
mm,
I think resisting transformation when it really is knocking on your door is just creating more pain. That's my
mm,
experience and what I've seen over and over. Um, Transformation also is related to willingness, I think.
mm,
I think it's difficult to transform unless we're willing. Um, it's kind of like let go or be dragged kind of thing,
mm,
which is why I think one of the things that we really are missing in our society is anything that is related to rites of passage,
mm,
initiations, because that's basically engaging transformation or a slice of life or a part where you need to walk through a threshold into another stage of your life and another stage of your consciousness. And if we don't have these places or spaces that are held by someone who is basically tasked with that, and we don't engage it consciously, then we have what's happening in society. So if I take, for instance, boys around 14 would be taken out into the woods, or they would be taken away from their mothers, and it would be enacted in a very dramatic way. And the mothers in Mexico, they do, there's a practice where they would literally, like, play out taking the child away from the mother. She would be wailing, and she would be like
mm,
really all over the place. It's kind of like cutting the cord, because traditionally they would then go out and create their own life and have children and provide for their family, etc., etc. But in our society, first of all, we're delayed because also we live so much longer, and kids live at home until they're way into their 20s, and it's just the nature of how things have evolved. However, then they will go through their rites of passage,
mm,
through drugs, through drinking, through promiscuity, through, whatever is going to put them in a challenging position also with their peers. And that can be really tricky. Can be quite destructive, but it's kind of like a natural process for them because they need to prove to themselves and their family that they're able to survive without the family, basically.
Mm. Yeah, such an amazing point. And obviously, I'm from an Indian background, and so when we come to the UK, it's almost as if there's also another layer because there's another culture to adapt to. And like you said, for the culture, on one hand, is great because the ancient cultures, the ancient traditions gives us that structure, gives us that rite of passage. But at the same time, it can condition us, and we're having to work through that as well. So what I find really interesting is no matter what culture you are, like you said, Mexico or Scandinavia or India, all these ancient cultures seem to have at the root a similar transformational process embedded into that culture. And obviously the shadow work is there. It's embedded into that culture.
Yeah. I think shadow work, if you look at it from a more kind of indigenous
Mm,
tradition, cultural aspect, it is there to confront you with your shadow. A
mm,
rite of passage or an initiation is for you to see a deeper layer of yourself and to let go of the layers that are holding you back from stepping into the next level of who
mm,
you are. And so by default, an initiation or a rite of passage is shadow work. And in our daily lives, shadow work is a way for us to look at the aspects that are holding us back,
mm,
that don't serve us any longer, so that we can step into a higher version of ourselves or a more
mm,
conscious version of ourselves. Um, and if we really kind of strip it down, the shadow is the subconscious. The subconscious mind runs 96% of what we're doing, 4% is run by the conscious mind. So when we keep on doing over and over and over stuff that we're just like, why am I still doing this? Whether it's in relationships or whether it's in work or whether it's in environmental kind of, circumstances, it is because it's an unconscious belief system that is running us. So the whole process of awakening, as ironic as it is, we come here, we take a body, we're brought up in a family, and we take on the conditioning of the gender, of the culture, of the family, and ancestral stuff as well. And then we play it out, and then we hit these walls, and life is starting to tell us, like, okay, you need to make a change because
mm,
this is clearly not working. And in these moments, then we can start, self-reflecting and think, okay, like, why am I doing this? So the shadow work is really understanding our subconscious.
mm,
And it's not about ostracizing it and kind of casting it out and vilifying it, because ultimately our shadow was a protection mechanism in the first place. Because the mind is very clever. The mind is here to protect us. It wants us to survive. So we will take on whatever it is that we have used as a protection mechanism for our lives and then play it out. So an example is somebody who grew up in total chaos is very likely to become quite a controlling adult,
mm,
because that control would help us when we were in chaos because it was endangering our lives. So all these things, actually, our shadow served a purpose, and it always comes from a good intention. But over time, it's actually sabotaging, our life. So the whole piece with shadow work is understanding it, first of all, and first of all, it's actually bringing it to light because it is subconscious for a reason. It's subconscious because it's so painful for it to realize it and understand it, that it's buried. So we don't even know, we're not even aware of what we're doing. And there is actually a really good sort of way of looking at it. And I can't remember who it was who did it originally, but the stages of evolution of consciousness, which is, where we start, the first stage is unconscious incompetence. So we don't know what we're doing,
mm,
still do it. And then we move into the second phase, which is conscious incompetence. We know that we're doing something that's not serving us. And then we move into conscious competence. We know how to do it a different way, but we still need to be kind of actively doing it. And the fourth stage is in unconscious competence. So it
Mm.
just becomes second nature, basically. And that's actually the role of shadow work and the evolution of shadow work. So we can change our consciousness, basically. And if we
Mm.
don't address it consciously, we just keep on playing it out and it's a train wreck.
Yeah, and look what they said in the East, the word is karma, that unconscious thought loops or thought patterns are playing out. And I really resonate with what you said about ostracizing that part of ourselves or even suppressing it. Because at the end of our last podcast, we were talking about music, the ancient Sikh music, and how it can take us to certain states. And ultimately, we want to be happy, we want to smile. But in order to get to that place, to be our full selves, to be our most powerful selves, we do have to then go into that dark side, which people miss, right? They bypass a lot of the area and they try to achieve that by not going through the work, by not being in the mud. And there's that analogy of that lotus coming through the mud.
Yeah.
So I'm really, really, really excited actually to explore about, how can people, well, actually, before they go into the shadow, why it's important to create a container that is sacred. Because I feel like a container where silence is okay to be held, where that word sacred is a bit lost in our today's fast-paced society. So no matter what religion or what culture, what indigenous wisdom culture we're in, there's this realm of being sacred. So could you maybe speak into that importance of that container and how that helps with that shadow work? If somebody has said, yes, I do want to start to transform.
Yeah. I mean, that's the approach that I really sort of think is the best.
Mm.
Because as we're connected to nature, we're also connected to spirit, and we've kind of lost both in the modern Western world. I mean,
Mm.
nature is a bit, more accessible and more part of like a normal thing to do, whereas the sacred has very, very much been connected to religion
Mm.
and kind of dogma.
Mm.
And what we've lost in a way is that innate connection to spirit. So when I was in India in February, or the time that I've spent in South America and Peru with the indigenous people there in the Andes, it's weaved into their daily lives.
Mm.
Because in a way, in Peru, to take the example, is that, if your llamas are not fertile, you don't eat, you don't either get, them as transports or food. So, creating ceremony with the elements and with the gods and goddesses of fertility and all of this was in a way the only way of making sure that things were going to move in the right direction. And there was this, or there still is, that innate trust that this is a part of how you will live as a human as well.
Mm.
And we have taken that away so much from our culture because we don't need it, because everything else is automated and very materialistic, basically.
Mm.
Um, that aspect of, if we don't involve spirits, then we're not going to sustain our life, doesn't exist anymore. However, what I experienced when I was in India was, every single person who was going to the temples or making offerings, they would go as families. So it was also like a social thing, and it's completely normal. And I think that that's so sad that we don't have that in a way in our culture, because we are so split, our families are so split, our whole, the elders or the older people are kind of, sent away, and, the parents have a huge strain, and the kids are, either in a nursery or kindergarten, or we're not evolving as a family anymore.
Mm.
And in a way, spirit also brings us together, and by going to the temple and making offerings. And the whole point also is that we have that reciprocity with the spirit world, where in Asia in general, I've seen that also when I was in Bali, and I know that there's a bit of a, stigma around Bali, but the native people, it's normal for them to go to the temple, make an offering, then they go to work.
Mm.
they have that reciprocity and that fabric of spirit in every element of their daily lives. And that's what we lack. And we in the modern Western world are very extractive. It's like the colonialist culture of like, what can I get for myself? So the relationship we have to spirit now, what we see a lot, especially on social media and stuff like that, is like, I want the healing. I want the visions. I want the messages. What do I get from spirit rather than how do I build a relationship with spirit, which is very much what I talk about in the book.
Mm.
Um, and that's really essential. And
Mm.
it's something that we've lost. So how does that tie in with, the shadow work? It starts to build that container in which you're held, because when you're going through it and you're going through a dark night of the soul or really deep into your shadow work, which is very underworld stuff, it's again in the shadow because it's painful. That is when we really need to call also for a different level of support. And that's when we can deepen our connection to spirit, because we get to a point where we have no choice but start praying in a way.
Mm.
Anyone who's gone through something very difficult will have experienced that at some point in their life where they're like, okay, like I can't hold this. The people around me can't do this. I need a bigger force to support me through this. So that's
Mm.
the same for, transformation.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the spirit, and then also you mentioned Mother Nature. And I also remember we were talking about this happening in the human body, like ascending and descending.
Yeah.
Um, so I was wondering if you could talk into this. And also you mentioned like religion, and I'm really curious about because you were mentioning that they do have a connection. But what I've noticed is, and sometimes a lot of religions, that they are connecting, but they are extracting this connection, but they're losing the connection with the mother nature. So how is this playing out in the human body?
The loss of connection with nature, you mean? Or
Hmm. So yeah, like the connection to the spirit. If you can talk about what is really is spirit, and how is that working in the human body. So I know you mentioned the ascending and the descending parts in the human body as well.
yeah. Um, Spirit for me is, you can call it God, you can call it the divine, you can
Mm.
call it Mother Nature, you can, all the names that we have for the divine, basically. And then I also refer to spirit as, we have spirit allies. So we
Mm.
have allies in the spirits of nature, from the elements to the plants to all the spirits that we can find in the natural world, because they're all alive, to our ancestors as well. And then the bigger, greater mystery
Mm.
of all creation. That's what I mean by spirit. And how does that translate into the body? I think it all goes together. I think anyone who's on a spiritual path and is completely oblivious to their own physical well-being, there is an element that just doesn't, there's something that's not kind of
Mm.
matching. Because our body is very much a representation also of how we relate to ourselves and to our spirit. So if we don't sort of treat ourselves well, how can we treat someone else well as well? And I think that in a way is also spirituality, is how we are acting as a human towards other humans and other living beings. Um, and they're also, one of the things that the biggest aspect that I have noticed and gone through is, if we have if we shift our frequency
Mm.
because we're going through a big kind of energetic upgrade or up leveling in consciousness, very often, well, every single time, our soul will take a leap because it's much faster, because it's not in form. And then our body has to catch up with that. So the lag can be quite difficult. And that's where there's quite a lot of turmoil, and we can find ourselves being quite lost. And then there's the emotional body that needs to purify, the mental body that needs to purify, and the physical body that needs to purify. So, if we take, Asian cultures, that's very much, in the culture as well. I mean, South American as well. Like there's a lot of cleaning the body and then cleaning, the mental body, physical body, mental body, emotional body, energetic body.
Mm,
So that's the link to, the different bodies, because we all have these different bodies. So if we take a leap in consciousness, that will be felt also physically. And when
mm,
it comes to the ascent and the descent, what we were talking about was the ascending type of spirituality, which is, moving, if we take the chakra system from the base to the crown and moving up, or transcendence and non-duality, is quite masculine. It's more sort of like, unity consciousness and not connecting with the body so much, whereas
mm.
feminine awakening is very much like the descent and going. It's almost like spirit goes into the body rather than the body goes into spirit.
Okay.
And it is about awakening through the body, awakening through our emotions, awakening through our mental landscape. And that's all kind of, it's not easy, because the awakening of the feminine teaches through the underworld and through the descent.
Mm,
It's uncomfortable, but that's what, like the whole love and light community has been running away from for a long time. And there's no right or wrong. I think there are different moments for different needs
mm,
in the human evolution. And now it really is a time of going into the body, going into the shadow, and stop, pretending that whatever needs to be looked at doesn't exist.
mm. And so before we go into the feminine and the shadow aspects, if we can also just touch on that ascendance, I'm guessing that the masculine and the feminine movements happen in both males and females.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So, I mean, the ascending aspect is more about, if we take, Buddhism, or as I said, like many kind of spiritual traditions which
mhm,
are about transcending the body.
mhm,
That's basically what I meant. And that's
okay.
more like, moving upwards, leaving the body. And it usually, yeah, it's much more a masculine premise. Like it would be taught by men. It would be,
Mm,
uh, yeah, I mean, that's really what I can say about it.
okay. And that would make sense because, like, if you go to the origins of a lot of religions or spiritual starts, they would have that integrated. But over time, it seems like the descending process was left out, and then it was becoming overly transcendent rather than integrated.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
think I think that could have been something that happened over time.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so I'm really now interested in going into this integration of the feminine, and I know you mentioned spirits, and there's like a lot of pagan understanding in the Nordic regions. In South America, they have their understanding. And the Greeks, they have their gods. The Egyptians, they have their gods. In Hinduism and China, I think they have their gods as well. And they're, from my understanding, they are attributes of our personalities or certain even attributes of the five elements that occur in nature. So as we begin to go down and descend, how does this process start? What are you looking for in with your clients as you start to go in this descending process?
Um, they go into it before they find me.
Mm.
That's why they find me. Um, because they know that something is not working, and they usually go through something that is really difficult for them.
Mm.
Be a separation, it could be, like losing a business, it could be, I mean, you name it, anything that really kind of, puts us up against ourselves. And so there isn't so much about looking for anything, it's just giving them guidance of how to navigate, through a death and rebirth cycle, really. I mean, you can also look at it from the perspective of the hero's journey,
Mm.
Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. It's, the hero is called to adventure. So that's usually whatever is happening to you. and then you're invited into the underworld and fighting the demons and and the shadows, and then coming out of there with your gifts and the gold, and then you rise and you bring that into your life, and then the next cycle starts.
Mm.
So it really is about navigating that. And the way I work with clients is very much based on the medicine wheel, where we explore, where it's a healing kind of methodology, rather, that's the best way to describe it, where we go through the different directions, the 7 directions. So it was east, south, west, north, below, above, and within, which is very much linked to the more Nordic and Celtic traditions,
Wow.
rather than just having the 4 kind of directions. And with those directions, we have the elements that are connected to it. So we explore what's your relationship to fire, what's your relationship to water, to air, to earth, the below, which is the mother, the above, which is the father, and the within, which is the great mystery. And then when you start exploring these aspects, you start looking at, so let's say in the elements, you might have something that is predominant. So let's say if you have too much fire and the fire is out of control, it can be either self-consuming or consuming of others, where it's a destructive force. Whereas a fire that is, strong and regulated, it gives you energy, it gives you passion, it gives you vision, it gives, it enlightens the path. And then it's like, how do you bring balance back into that element? And is there, just looking at all these different aspects, which are related also obviously to nature, and then at the same time really cultivating their relationship to these different spirits, because they are spirits. And then we also look at ancestry, which is very important, because ultimately, in a way, our life is kind of not really our own. It's very much, a lineage of, humans that you are just continuing the lineage for.
Mm.
So there are belief systems that we've taken on, traumas that we've taken on, gifts that we've taken on, legacies that we're here to carry out. So there's a lot of things to look into when we go into a deep phase of transformation, because there's so many facets to it.
Wow. Yeah, and thank you for just laying now. I'm very interested because I'm based in Scotland, grew up here. So I think this hasn't really been taught, this Celtic, for lack of a better word, I think shamanism, Celtic
Mm.
way, holistic healing. And that
Yeah.
actually rings a chord with the Ayurvedic system because you have the Pitta dosha and that has
Yeah.
that fire quality as well. So it's amazing how humans got the same understanding, but
Yeah.
obviously with their different systems. Um,
Yeah, it's the same with Chinese medicine, as
yeah.
you said, Ayurveda as well, because there's not only the Pitta, it's like the other doshas
Mm.
and the imbalances and how they reflect in our emotional nature and in our mental kind of landscape. Ultimately, I believe that all of these, ancient traditions and indigenous lineages, they're kind of all one and the same.
Mm.
They're just translated in different ways for different needs in different parts of the world. Yeah.
Amazing. And this dark feminine energy, so you mentioned the mother down. What what is this dark feminine energy? I know we were talking about Kali, goddess, and the Greek it's talk about some other way in other cultures. It's another way. How do you experience or getting in contact with this darker goddess energy? Or even before we get to that, what is the this goddess and what does that dark feminine mean?
So first of all, I think the dark has been vilified and is misunderstood. So when you say dark feminine or dark goddess, people are like, "Oh my God, like this is really dark and malevolent, basically." Uh, However, she is misunderstood because she's here to bring transformation. It really is the energy of destruction before liberation, and the ultimate goal is liberation, basically.
Mm.
And so you would have a goddess like Kali, for instance, or, there's so many other ones, so many from other cultures, like there's Hel in the Norse tradition,
Mm.
Hel. Or you would also have Inanna, which is basically the goddess the myth of Inanna is the tale of death and rebirth, basically.
Mm.
it's kind of like another take on the hero's journey. And she's a Sumerian goddess. She's the goddess of heaven and earth. Then you have Lilith, who was the original, well, she was the wife of, she was the original Eve, basically. And so obviously we know how people have felt about her over, time, whereas she is actually the primordial feminine energy. Then we have Hecate, who's, the like governing over the witches. So the dark feminine is actually an energy that society is not accepting of. So if we look at the feminine, you have two rivers, which is what I've been taught in one of my apprenticeships, is that the feminine runs two rivers. There's the white river, which is the energy of, the softer, kinder, caring feminine, which is, Mother Mary or other kind of archetypes that are, just like these gentler energies and also much more accommodating and easier for society to deal with. Then we have the red river, which would be, the Kalis and the more emotional, chaotic kind of forces that are here to bring that transformation. They're emotional and, they're alive and they're fierce. And the dark feminine is actually a fierce, loving energy. And it's like a kind of tough love. It's like whatever is not truth and love needs to be destroyed, which is very much the energy of Kali with her dagger. That's what she slices through, basically. And people don't like the discomfort that comes with that energy because it is uncomfortable. It means that you're going to have to change. You're going to have to look at things in a different way. And nobody wants to change unless they have to change. I mean, it's true for all of us, really. And the dark feminine brings that energy of transformation. And she brings the energy of death and rebirth. She takes you into the underworld and gets you to look at your shadow. But then it's also about loving the shadow because it is a very loving energy. It's just not the, stroke your hair kind of energy. It's like, I love you and you need to look at this so that you can love yourself kind of energy. And then you emerge from that with a new relationship to yourself, to your shadow. And so in a way, like she's definitely very kind of shadowy, but ultimately her goal is to bring more love into the world. And that is the paradigm shift that I believe that we're very much looking at right now. And it's the energy that is needed in this world where women are supported in that energy to bring the transformation that they've come here to bring and not just be the palatable good girl that we've all been conditioned into being. And men as well, men have been conditioned to be the good guys, really helping anyone.
Yeah, and I see that's like the awakening process is not just like ta-da, but it's kind of like it seems like all of these layers, all of these, and I think the ancient cultures had a mythological understanding, but nowadays we're shunning this mythological understanding, although we like to watch Marvel. But it really seems that they are attributes or they are certain qualities, or we say gunas in nature, that are then manifested as us as human beings. So coming from a Sikh background, we are very in touch with that dark feminine energy. So for example, just to give a bit of background to the viewers, that we have three kind of holy texts, but actually in the community itself, there has been like a detachment from the more warrior energy. And within that last text, in our 10 gurus, the last one formed what's called the Khalsa army. And in order to form that, he invoked this Kali energy, this dark, divine feminine, and to have this all steel force in the men and the women. So the men and the women were empowered to totally see their shadow so they could protect, not just themselves, but the whole communities. And I feel what we're looking at, because I've felt that myself, to be very real with the viewers, to really know what it's like for the people pleasing, because I have people pleasing, or I did have more of it. It's like, well, what's causing that people pleasing? It's fear of being rejected. What's the energy behind that? So I have to actually come in contact face to face with the fear of being rejected, with the wanting to be acceptance. And that's still a spiritual process, because we're coming face to face. And we need to have that Kali energy to be like, right, what does it feel like to say something that people are not going to like?
Yeah.
What does it take to express the truth where that will actually ruffle some feathers? And that when we're talking in that energy, we can almost feel that Kali energy working through us. So it's sometimes we might, I feel, extract that in the head, but when we really go through it, we can feel that energy working through us. I don't know
Yeah.
if you want to speak into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what you're sharing, and it's great that you're doing that, because I think most people will recognize that people pleaser energy. Like, I definitely have it, and I don't think I know anyone, or I know very few people who wouldn't, have that fairly strongly in
Mm,
them. And again, I think it's like, the good girl and nice, nice guy kind of energy, where we think, well, it's survival basically,
mm,
like we've been taught from a very young age that if we do please, then we're accepted by our kind of group of people. And on a very primal animalistic kind of level, if we're, outcast from our horde, we
mm,
die. I mean,
mm,
it's very kind of like it's very kind of valid to do that. And then based on cultural kind of conditioning and familial conditioning, it is, stronger or less strong.
mm,
So I think, and it's interesting because I was told once actually that the you'll find the most rage in actually the codependent person, and people pleasing and codependency go hand in hand. So ironically, even though we come across as really nice, blah, 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 it's actually one of the more destructive kind of ways of relating to other people, because
mm,
the resentment builds, and we betray ourselves, but we're not really taught and supported in being truthful, because usually it's backfired. I
mm,
think my generation's parents and their children probably are a bit more truthful, and maybe we've gone too far into,
mm,
listening to what the kids want to express and who they are, and encouraging all of this, and then maybe not. I mean, every generation has to find their balance, and we're going from one extreme to another, and eventually hopefully we'll find the right balance. But that energy of truth and authenticity is
mm,
really what is piercing through right now. And I feel very strongly, I was speaking to a dear friend of mine about that, and we were both saying that the energy that is governing right now, if we're out of integrity in terms of who congruence with ourselves and our truth, it just doesn't work, whether we don't feel well in ourselves, or the relationships, whatever type of relationship it is, start crumbling or dissolve. There is really something about truth that is very much connected with this energy of the dark feminine that is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger right now. And maybe it is just, where you are on your path as well in terms of spiritual awakening, where you're at with your relationship to yourself. But I find that the more you confront yourself and you go
mm,
into the shadow, there is an aspect of freedom and liberation that comes with that, because then you don't have to hide anymore and be accepted, and fear of rejection, et cetera, that we all have. So it's just this kind of like very ironic process. Whoever created this has an incredible sense of humor,
mm. Yeah, and I think humor is also missing sometimes because people get stuck in their warrior aspect, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, no, you can like have a sword but also laugh at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, and I think sometimes people are missing that aspect. But I think what you were speaking about this conscious shift you were speaking into, because a lot of people might be in their own minds. So if you could maybe speak about maybe the shift that is happening. I don't know if it's the Western world or the Eastern world, but how can people start to begin to notice these energy changes in the collective?
I think the more refined is not the right word, but like the more you've gone through your own layers, the more you start seeing the muddied waters of the collective.
Mm,
And also, there is no such thing as, there is no separation between the individual and the collective in a way, like whatever, it's so within, so without, like all the ancient kind of traditions will have that saying in one way or another. Like whatever is happening within you is happening outside of yourself. Your inner world is manifested in your outer world. So as you shift your own kind of consciousness and relationship to yourself, you also start noticing these shifts in the collective. And then we have the reality of the collective and what it's moving through. And people are waking up to the fact that, and this is due to probably, social media, internet, and all of this, where information is divulged. You can't hide stuff anymore the way you were able to before, whether it's, sharing files or filming stuff, or, like people can't, hide the way they used to and get away with the stuff that they used to get away with. So the collective is also waking up to the fact that, this is a bit of a shit show. I mean, like people have been taking advantage of humans, certain humans have been taking advantage of the majority of humans, let's put it that way.
Mm.
People are waking up to that and starting to feel like, this is not right. And at the same time, as all of this is really kind of, like there is a tension in the collective. I think anyone feels that. And it kind of started with COVID. And since then, it's kind of just escalated, because also people are asking more questions, and that kind of tension is really something that is bringing up the collective shadow,
Mm.
which is why the whole shadow work aspect of things is so important, because when you're in a pressure cooker, your stuff's going to come up as well. And one of the best things we can do to move through whatever, humanity is going through, is to be centered in ourselves. And if we don't have that space within us because unresolved trauma and lack of self-awareness, or, the way we don't take care of ourselves, it's going to be really hard to not get involved in, the turmoil that is emerging in the collective.
Mm. Yeah, it's so interesting. Like as above, so below, or like roots and shoots. As you
Exactly.
want to grow taller, you have to go deeper.
Yeah.
Um, so interesting, and that I think it speaks to the importance of grounding, connecting to the earth energies. And I'm just so interested because we did talk about it before, um, about where you're born. So I was born. No, I was born in Scotland, but my family is from India. You were born, and you said Finland, but then you were moved. So do you find there's any pattern or relationship difference to your your purpose, why you're here, and if your family has shifted, do you find that affects you in some way?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think, the sense of belonging is definitely one of my explorations in
Mm.
this lifetime, because I didn't grow up in the country that I was born in and where my extended family is. Um, but that's taught me, I mean, if we really kind of boil it all down to what are we here to learn
Mm.
and what are we here to connect with, is that we are part of a bigger web of life.
Mm.
And no matter where you are, no matter who you are a part of it, and you by default belong. But then we have all this social conditioning, and also like this felt sense as a human that if we're not connected to the land, or we're not connected to a community, then we feel that we don't belong.
Mm.
And one thing that I found really interesting was Brene Brown did this whole inquiry around belonging. She wrote a book about it, and she said the opposite of belonging is not to feel rejected, or, like it is actually fitting in. Like the opposite of belonging is fitting in.
Wow.
So it's when you betray yourself to become what is expected, what you believe is expected to be part of a group of people, then you lose the belonging.
Wow.
So I think that's really kind of the whole thing with belonging. And there are so many people who are displaced in the modern Western world. I mean, America, the US, is I mean, they're all immigrants except for the Native Americans that were persecuted. So that's another layer of
Mm.
something that went very wrong. Europe, people are more settled because a lot of, people would be still connected to where they come from. But all the big kind of like, movements of immigration, of migration in general, will bring that with them.
Yeah, and like connecting to the land of your ancestors as well. Because I know when I went to India, I felt very connected to that land, and I don't know why. And I know when you went to India, you're also saying that when you were there, you felt a certain energy there. It could be the civilization was there a long time. It could be that certain way. So I really do feel that connecting to the land really
Yeah.
helps you ground in all sorts of levels.
Yeah. And I think there is, like there is our um, blood ancestry, and then there is our spiritual ancestry.
Oh.
So you would connect probably on both levels going to India because of your spiritual practice and belief and your origin. And then there's also, me connecting with the land in Finland. And I definitely feel very connected to the Norse tradition and the Norse gods and all of that. It just, it just works for me. And when I'm working, there is definitely that energy that is very present with me. And at the same time, going to India, I knew that the energy that I was connecting with was the mother energy. And I felt,
Mm,
from Kali to the divine feminine to, like all these aspects, because one of my spiritual kind of ancestral paths is working with the Great Mother and
mm,
wherever she's present. And
wow.
people feel that, when they feel called to certain areas of the world, going to South America or to Asia, or where there are more kind of um, where spirituality is still very much more alive than here. And it's a way for people to remember what spirituality is outside of religion.
Mm. And as we slowly begin to wrap up as well, I was just wondering if you could share with the viewers, and also I'm very interested, a bit about the Nordic ancestors, the gods as well, and how you connect with them and how you use them in your practice. Because from my tradition, we have um, a beautifully composed rendition called Arti, which is like a lamplit worship, and all of these energies are always playing about in the world, and that was written by our first guru, Nanak. And so I'm so interested how these energies are playing and how humans are connected to them in different cultures. So if you could share a bit about the Nordic way of connecting and who are these gods and how do you use them?
Um, I don't usually see so much like, for me, it's not so much about tradition, it's about, the energies that resonate.
Mm,
And not for some reason, because I was born there, I always struggled a bit with the culture, but the land, especially since I started working more shamanically and animistically, it made sense to me that there's something about the land there that really is alive for me and just
mm,
that I connect with. Um, I mean, if people are interested to explore more, you can look into the Norse tradition, which is called Cedar, Seidr, where you explore, like all the different sort of the different realms of the gods, and the gods from Odin to Freya to Thor to I mean, you know, Tor, which is Thor in Swedish, is a name that has been passed down through my grandfather, my father, and my son it's his middle name as well. And there is something about, like that energy that is connected to, my immediate family.
mm.
So, and I've always had a fascination for, lightning storms and lightning in general. And I think more than, the average, everybody likes a good storm, but like it's a different level for me. And so, it started with that and getting interested in the whole, Norse mythology that
Mm,
I've read with my kids quite a bit. And, Loki, the trickster. There's something like when you really, it's hard to explain. There's like this kind of innate kind of connection to it. And whether it's through, my nationality and where I was born, or just, as I said, we have our spiritual ancestry as well. I don't know, but when I work with the feminine, and actually my introduction into the dark feminine was an embodied experience that I had in a ceremony, which was from the cedar tradition, which
mm.
was called a high seed, and I had my experience with that was completely undeniable. So that was how it opened the doors for me to work directly with the dark feminine, which a lot of people have questioned and said, like, are you sure? It's not, it could be, all the stigma that is around it that we talked about earlier.
Mm.
So how to work with, like the Nordic tradition. It's also, the runes are the divination tool that is used in the Norse tradition. So they're symbols that are painted in red on stones, and all these symbols mean something. So it's kind of like, tarot, but different formats, really.
Mm.
Um, and it's very nature based, like actually most original traditions, they are very connected to nature. So, um, you know, going out, doing sitting out ceremonies, which is, a similar thing to what the Native Americans do when they do a vision quest. This one is called utesitta, which is like sitting outside.
Mm.
So they all kind of overlap. So I think if somebody feels very drawn to, I mean, Scotland for me, I've been there only twice, but I have I have a connection with the land there and the spirits there. And I think there is a kind of like Nordic collective spirit energy that one connects with or not. And that's something to deepen and to explore, more if people feel the connection to that.
Mm. I've definitely felt that going to like the islands in Scotland or going to Iona. There's something
Mm.
light or tangible
Yeah.
you can feel. So definitely
Yeah.
some cool stuff. And Vision Quest you mentioned as well. I think for the viewers, could you just give something on this as well?
Vision Quest is a Native American rite of passage
Okay.
where it's when boys are transitioning into manhood, they're sent out on their own into the wild, where if you really go hardcore Vision Quest, you don't have any food, any water, any shelter. If
Mm.
you would do it now in a more kind of um, easier version, you would actually have water and shelter quite often. You would have a tent.
Mm.
And the whole point is that you're sent out and you're held by the village. So the village or the community drinks for you, sings for you, prays for you when you're out.
Mm.
And then you get a vision, which is your role in your tribe, so to speak.
Mm.
And if someone does that nowadays, you might have a vision about whatever it is that you need to know, basically. And it's very often not something that you expect going into it. So
Mm.
yeah, it's a whole rite of passage.
Amazing. So it's almost like the community is advocating for you to live your dharma.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that we're also completely lost here. We're so alone on our journeys, and group consciousness and community consciousness is so powerful because it gives energy to the individual. And now we're all trying to generate this energy by ourselves, and it's exhausting.
Amazing. As you say in our tradition, Esi Sangit, Jesse Rangit. So like whoever Sangit or people you're around, that's the color you almost become.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Is there anything else you'd like to share for the viewers, for the listeners about shadow work?
Uh, don't avoid it. Don't avoid it and do it consciously. That's really
Mm.
what I would invite people to reflect on. And if there is a big change around the corner, engaging it consciously is easier than it's kind of like, not being dragged through it.
Mm.
And we've unfortunately lost also, the guidance of elders, and that is something that we very much need in our society, or medicine men and women or shamans or whatever, the spiritual guides of our society are missing as well. So when you go on a deep transformational journey, you're going to go through it. You're going to go through the ringer, and doing that with support and guidance is way easier than trying to just figure it out on your own. So,
Mm.
yeah, seek support and seek guidance, I would say,
Amazing.
and be brave.
And be brave. And where can people find you if they're interested to learn more or even talk to you a bit deeper about this work as well?
Yeah, so my website, which is Akasha, AKASHA -awakening.com, or on Instagram, which is also my handle is Akasha_awakening, and they'll find everything there. And one way to learn about this is to read the book. I think, that's also a good place to start. And it's called You're Loved, Essential Spirit Guides and Guardians. So, but yeah, I'd be really happy to, get into it with anyone who's feeling that they're on this journey and want to explore it. So yeah, and thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy to have this conversation with you, and I love what you're bringing to the world. It's really cool.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure. And I'll put all your links in the description below if people want to
Thank you.
check that out. So thank you so much again. So much wisdom, so much energy, I think that's needed right now, this type of energy. And hopefully this will resonate with the viewers as well. So thank you everybody for listening. And thanks again, Catherine. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye everyone.